Lie detector. One of the biggest lies most people believe is that a lie detector can actually detect a lie. When you see a suspect strapped into that chair, you assume the machine is looking for the truth. In reality, a polygraph is just a fancy thermometer for stress. It records simple physical changes: your heartbeat, your breathing, and the sweat on your fingers. The whole system relies on one guess: that telling a lie makes your body freak out. But there is a major flaw in that logic. Your body reacts to fear exactly the same way. Imagine an innocent person accused of a crime. They are terrified. Their heart is pounding and their hands are shaking because they are afraid of being punished for something they didn't do. The machine feels this panic and often flags it as a lie. On the other hand, a real criminal who feels no guilt can lie with a perfectly calm heart. Because their body stays relaxed, the machine thinks they are innocent. So why are they still used? They are used as a prop. The machine is a tool for intimidation. Police investigators use it to bluff. They stare at the moving needles and tell the suspect, "The machine knows you did it," even if the results are unclear. They want the person to feel so hopeless that they just give up and confess on their own. This is why most courts won't accept these tests as evidence. Judges and scientists know the secret. The machine cannot tell the difference between a liar and a nervous person. It doesn't detect lies. It detects anxiety. The diamond engagement ring. The tradition of the diamond engagement ring is less about ancient history and more about a frantic marketing strategy from the late 1930s. For most of human history, a promise of marriage didn't require a specific gemstone. If a ring was exchanged at all, it was just as likely to be a sapphire, a ruby, or a simple metal band. Diamonds were certainly valuable, but they were reserved for royalty or the ultra-wealthy, and they were generally considered just one option among many. That changed when massive diamond mines were discovered in South Africa. Suddenly, the world was flooded with diamonds. The stones were no longer rare, and their value was plummeting. The De Beers cartel, which controlled the supply, faced a crisis. They had a surplus of product and a public that didn't care to buy it. They needed to stop selling diamonds as mere jewelry and start selling them as an emotional necessity. In 1938, they hired an advertising agency to fundamentally shift public perception. The agency launched a subtle but aggressive campaign. They didn't just buy billboards, they influenced culture. They gifted large diamonds to Hollywood actresses to wear in films and paid for gossip columns to describe the stones in detail. They even sent lecturers into high schools to teach teenage girls that a diamond was the only true symbol of engagement. Then came the masterstroke in 1947, the slogan, "A diamond is forever." This four-word phrase accomplished two things. First, it linked the stone to the concept of eternal love. Second, and more importantly for business, it convinced people never to resell their diamonds, which kept the second-hand market from undercutting new sales. Even the 2-month salary rule was an arbitrary figure invented by marketing executives to anchor a price point in the mind of the buyer. Today, we view the diamond engagement ring as a timeless requirement of romance, but it is actually the result of one of the most successful psychological nudges in corporate history. Halitosis. The modern obsession with fresh breath is the result of a marketing campaign that rebranded a surgical antiseptic as a social necessity. In the late 19th century, Listerine was a product in search of a purpose. It was a strong-smelling amber liquid used primarily as a surgical disinfectant, a treatment for gonorrhea, and even a floor cleaner for hospitals. While effective at killing germs, it was too harsh for the average consumer to consider putting in their mouth on a daily basis. That changed in the 1920s when Gerard Lambert, the son of the company's owner, stumbled upon an obscure medical term in an old bulletin. The word was halitosis. It sounded clinical, serious, and like a legitimate medical pathology rather than a simple hygiene issue. Lambert and his advertising team decided to weaponize this word. They launched a campaign that shifted the focus from the product itself to the terrifying social consequences of not using it. They didn't sell fresh breath. They sold the fear of being an outcast. The advertisements told tragic stories of beautiful women who remained unmarried and capable men who were passed over for promotions. The villain in these stories was always halitosis. The genius of the campaign lay in the paranoia it induced. The ads claimed that you could have this condition without knowing it, and that even your closest friends would be too polite to tell you. Before this campaign, bad breath was considered a minor, occasional nuisance. By the time the campaign saturated the market, it was viewed as an unforgivable chronic condition. The company's profits rose by thousands of % in just 7 years. They successfully taught the public that a natural bodily occurrence was a disease, and that their floor cleaner was the only cure. Breakfast is the most important meal. The insistence that breakfast is the biological anchor of your day is largely a masterpiece of corporate lobbying. Before the industrial era, eating habits were dictated by hunger and availability, not a cultural rulebook. The Romans, for instance, often ate only one substantial meal a day around noon. The shift began with the Industrial Revolution, which required workers to fuel up before long, fixed shifts. However, the specific moral superiority of breakfast was manufactured by those with something to sell. In the late 19th century, religious health reformers like John Harvey Kellogg promoted processed grains to curb what they viewed as sinful bodily passions. They needed a market for their cornflakes. They marketed these cereals as a hygienic, sensible alternative to traditional heavier fare. The narrative hardened in the 20th century through the work of public relations pioneer Edward Bernays. Hired by a packing company to increase bacon sales, Bernays orchestrated a survey of 5,000 physicians. He asked them if a heavy breakfast was better than a light one to replenish energy. When the doctors agreed, Bernays successfully spun this into headlines, declaring that science supported a heavy breakfast of bacon and eggs. Cereal companies followed suit, funding studies that linked breakfast to better work performance. They created a feedback loop where marketing masqueraded as nutritional advice. The reality is that the human body adapts well to various eating windows. The fear of skipping a morning meal is not a metabolic warning signal, but the lingering echo of a century-old sales pitch. Jaywalking. The crime of crossing the street was invented by the auto industry to steal the road from you. If you go back just 100 years, the street wasn't a designated channel for cars. It was a public square. It was the collective front yard of the city, where pedestrians, vendors, and playing children ruled the pavement. In fact, if a car hit a person in 1915, the driver was almost automatically considered at fault. The public viewed cars as dangerous intruders, labeling them death machines. This public outrage was a disaster for car manufacturers. They realized that if people kept blaming cars for accidents, city governments would restrict speed limits to a crawl, rendering their product useless. They couldn't redesign the narrow city streets, so they decided to redesign public opinion. They needed to shift the blame from the heavy machine to the soft body it hit. They launched a strategic campaign to mock pedestrians. Their weapon was a specific word, jaywalker. In the 1920s, a jay wasn't just a name. It was a slang term for a country bumpkin, someone uneducated and clueless about city life. To be called a jaywalker was to be called a rube, who didn't know how to behave in civilized society. The industry lobbied to enact local ordinances and used Boy Scouts to hand out shame cards to people crossing the street. They staged parades where clowns were hit by cars to show that only fools walked in the road. It worked. Social shame turned into legal restriction. Within 2 decades, the auto industry had successfully rewritten the law. Today, when we see someone walking in the street, we instinctively feel they don't belong there. But the truth is, the road was theirs first. It was taken by a marketing trick so successful, we forgot it was a lie. Planned obsolescence. The frustration you feel when your phone slows down exactly 2 years after you bought it is a manufactured emotion. It is the result of a business strategy designed to turn your durable goods into disposable trash. This concept began in a secret meeting in Geneva in 1924. The world's biggest light bulb manufacturers realized their products were becoming too good. Bulbs were lasting practically forever, which meant sales were stagnating. To fix this problem, they formed a cartel and agreed to lower the lifespan of a light bulb to exactly 1,000 hours. They didn't engineer a better bulb. They engineered a fragile one. This was the birth of planned obsolescence. Today, this philosophy is baked into the design of almost everything you own. It has evolved from fragile filaments to unrepairable barriers. Engineers are often instructed to use heavy amounts of glue instead of screws, ensuring that opening a device to fix a battery destroys the screen. They use proprietary screws that no standard screwdriver can turn. Software updates are rolled out that demand more processing power than older hardware can handle, making a perfectly functional device feel sluggish and obsolete. The goal is to shift your status from an owner to a consumer. An owner maintains and repairs. A consumer uses and discards. Companies rely on this cycle of waste to maintain infinite growth. If they sold you a washing machine that lasted 40 years, as they did in the mid-20th century, they would lose decades of future sales. We have been trained to view this cycle as the natural pace of innovation. We assume that new technology must inherently replace the old. But the reality is much simpler. Your devices aren't dying because we lack the technology to keep them alive. They are dying because your need for a replacement is the product they are actually selling. The carbon footprint. The idea that climate change is your personal fault was invented by an oil company to protect its profits. In the early 2000s, British Petroleum faced a massive branding challenge. As one of the world's largest extractors of fossil fuels, they were the obvious target for a growing environmental movement. To deflect the heat, they hired public relations experts to rebrand the company Beyond Petroleum. But their most effective tool wasn't a new logo, it was a new way of thinking. In 2004, they unveiled the Carbon Footprint Calculator. This digital tool invited ordinary people to calculate the amount of carbon dioxide created by their daily lives. You entered your commute, your diet, and your heating bill, and the machine told you how much damage you were personally doing to the earth. It was a masterclass in misdirection. By popularizing the term carbon footprint, the industry successfully shifted the burden of responsibility from the producer to the consumer. Suddenly, the global climate crisis wasn't about corporate regulation or industrial emission standards. It was about whether you remembered to change your light bulbs, or if you drove to the grocery store. The scale of this deception is staggering. A single individual could live a completely carbon-neutral life for 80 years, and the emissions saved would be equivalent to what the global energy sector produces in just a few seconds. The calculator made the problem feel manageable by making it personal. but it actually made the solution impossible by ignoring the system. The concept of the personal carbon footprint suggests that planetary warming is a failure of individual character. It keeps the public busy judging their neighbours' grocery lists while the architects of the crisis continue their operations without interruption. Plastic recycling, the three arrows chasing each other on the bottom of your plastic water bottle, represent the most successful marketing deception of the last century. We are taught that this triangle means the item will be broken down and reborn as something new. The reality is that this symbol was never intended to guarantee recycling. It was designed to confuse you. In the late 1980s, the oil and plastics industry faced a crisis. Municipalities were threatening to ban plastic products because they were clogging landfills. To save their market, industry leaders pushed for a universal code system. They adopted the familiar recycling triangle, but placed numbers inside it. To the casual observer, it looked like a green seal of approval. Legally, it was just a resin identification code. It told the garbage facility what kind of plastic it was, not whether it could actually be processed. The truth is that recycling plastic is economically impossible for most materials. Unlike aluminum or glass, which can be melted down infinitely, plastic degrades every time it is processed. Turning a used bottle into a new bottle is often more expensive than simply making a brand new one from fresh oil. For decades, companies spent millions on advertisements showing bottles transforming into park benches and fleece jackets. This convinced the public that disposability was sustainable. It gave us permission to buy single-use items without guilt. The statistics reveal the grim effectiveness of this campaign. Since the widespread adoption of the symbol, less than 10% of all plastic ever produced has been recycled. The vast majority sits in landfills or floats in the ocean. The recycling bin was not built to save the planet. It was built to ensure you never stopped buying plastic. Clean coal. The phrase clean coal is a contradiction in terms designed to make you believe a dirty rock can become a climate solution. For generations, coal was the undisputed villain of the environment. It turned city skies grey, coated lungs in soot, and fueled the acid rain crisis. As the world began to wake up to the realities of climate change, the industry faced an existential threat. They knew they could not change the chemical composition of carbon, so they decided to change the branding instead. The marketing pitch suggests that advanced technology can scrub the pollution from the smokestacks and bury it harmlessly underground. This concept allows politicians and executives to promise a future where we can keep burning fossil fuels without consequence. It paints a picture of a guilt-free power plant. The reality of this engineering is an economic and physical failure. The machinery required to capture carbon dioxide is incredibly expensive and energy-intensive. Running the equipment to clean the coal actually requires burning more coal, which significantly lowers the efficiency of the plant. It creates a parasite that eats into the power generation it is supposed to save. Furthermore, this narrow focus on the smokestack ignores the violence of the extraction. Before coal ever reaches the furnace, it requires blowing up mountaintops, strip mining forests, and polluting local water tables with heavy metals. There is no filter that can sanitize the destruction of a landscape. Billions of taxpayer dollars have been poured into these projects, yet most have been abandoned or operate at a fraction of their promised capacity. The term clean coal does not describe a viable technology. It is a stalling tactic used to delay the inevitable transition to energy sources that don't need to be scrubbed in the first place. Vitamin water. The healthiest looking bottle in the convenience store is actually a stealth delivery system for pure sugar. In the early 2000s, The beverage industry faced a looming crisis. The public was beginning to turn against soda, linking it directly to obesity and diabetes. Companies needed a way to sell sugar water to people who were trying to avoid sugar water. Their solution was to rebrand the liquid as a lifestyle accessory. They took water, added bright food coloring, and dissolved a massive amount of crystalline fructose into it. Then came the marketing genius. They sprinkled in a fraction of a cent's worth of synthetic vitamins and gave the flavors medical-sounding names like Focus, Defense, and Rescue. The design was minimalist and clinical, mimicking the aesthetic of an IV bag or a prescription label. It sat on the shelf, looking like the antidote to soda, but chemically, it was its twin. The deception relies on the health halo effect. When you see the word vitamin, your brain assumes the product is good for you. You ignore the nutrition label, which reveals that a single bottle contains nearly as much sugar as a can of cola. When you drink it, your body does not register a health boost. It registers a massive glucose spike. Most of the added vitamins are unnecessary for the average diet and are simply flushed out by your kidneys, while the liquid candy stays in your system. The lie was eventually challenged in a major class action lawsuit. When the parent company, Coca-Cola, was forced to defend the brand in court, their lawyers made a stunning admission. They argued that no reasonable consumer could possibly be misled into thinking that vitamin water was a healthy beverage. They effectively admitted that the product's entire identity was a transparent fantasy. They sold the illusion of wellness to keep selling the reality of syrup. Flushable wipes. The word flushable on a package of wet wipes describes a physical possibility rather than a safe consequence. When you drop a piece of standard toilet paper into the bowl, it begins to disintegrate almost immediately. It is engineered to fall apart. The paper consists of short, natural fibers held together by weak bonds that water easily breaks. It is designed to die the moment it touches the sewer system. A wet wipe is engineered for the exact opposite purpose. It needs to be durable. To ensure it doesn't tear in your hand while you are using it, manufacturers reinforce the material with synthetic fibers and plastics. They weave it to stay strong when wet. This durability makes it excellent for cleaning, but catastrophic for plumbing. When you flush one, it disappears from your sight, so you assume the problem is solved. In reality, the wipe remains fully intact as it travels through the pipes. Because it does not dissolve, it acts like a net. As it moves through the dark tunnels of the municipal sewer, it snags on rough pipe edges and catches grease, hair, and other debris. One wipe becomes two, and then two become a colony. These clumps eventually merge with cooking fat to create massive, concrete-like blockages known as fatbergs. These subterranean monsters can grow to the size of city buses, choking the flow of wastewater and causing raw sewage to back up into basements or overflow into local waterways. The industry defends the label by claiming that if the item clears the U-bend of your toilet, it is technically flushable. They rely on a definition that ignores what happens 10 feet down the line. They sell you the convenience of disposal, while leaving the city with the expensive reality of retrieval. Printer ink scams. The black liquid sitting in your desk printer right now is one of the most expensive fluids on Earth, costing more by weight than fine champagne or imported perfume. This absurd valuation has nothing to do with rare ingredients or complex chemical engineering. It is an artificial price wall erected by a deliberate business strategy. The trap begins when you buy the printer itself. Manufacturers often sell the hardware to you at a financial loss. That affordable new machine is effectively a Trojan horse meant to get inside your home office. Once it is plugged in, the real revenue stream begins. The company knows that once you own their specific machine, you are structurally locked into their ecosystem. To ensure you stay locked in, they weaponize the cartridge itself. Modern ink cartridges are fitted with small microchips. The industry claims these are for quality control, but their primary function is to act as digital gatekeepers. These chips prevent the printer from accepting cheaper generic alternatives. Even more frustratingly, the software often uses the chip to guess ink levels based on arbitrary page counts rather than measuring the actual fluid remaining. This results in the infuriating low ink warning that stops your work dead. Countless examinations have revealed that cartridges declared empty by the machine often still contain 20 to 40% of their usable ink. You are regularly forced to discard a functional product. The technology on your desk is not engineered for efficiency. It is engineered for synchronized waste designed to maximize perpetual profit. Gold-plated HDMI cables. The $100 cable connecting your television to your game console is performing the exact same job as the $5 version in the discount bin. This widespread consumer confusion stems from a hangover of the analog era. Back when we used red, white, and yellow cords to hook up a VCR, the quality of the wire actually mattered. An analog signal is a physical wave. As it travels down a wire, it can degrade, get fuzzy, or pick up static. In that world, spending more money for better shielding could technically make the picture look a little bit sharper. But an HDMI cable operates in a completely different universe. It transmits a digital signal. This means it isn't sending a wave. It is sending a rapid stream of data, effectively just ones and zeros. Think of it like sending an email. It doesn't matter if you type the email on a solid gold keyboard or a cheap plastic one. The message arrives at the destination exactly the same way. Retailers exploit this misunderstanding to upsell you massive markups. They coat the connectors in a thin layer of gold, wrap the cord in braided nylon, and package it in a premium box. They claim the gold provides better conductivity. While it is true that gold resists corrosion, unless your living room is as humid as a rainforest, your connectors are not going to rust. The physics of digital data are unforgivingly simple. The image has no gradient of quality. It either appears perfectly on your screen or it cuts out completely. There is no such thing as a warmer digital picture or richer digital sound. By paying 10 times the price for a premium brand, you aren't buying a better experience. You are simply buying jewelry for the back of your television. The extended warranty, the most profitable item in an electronics store, is not the television on the wall, but the invisible promise sold at the register. When the cashier asks if you want to protect your purchase, they are triggering a specific psychological vulnerability. You have just committed to spending a significant amount of money, and your brain is naturally anxious about losing that investment. The store exploits this moment of hesitation to sell you a product that creates money out of thin air. The math behind these protection plans relies on a statistical reality that the industry rarely discusses. Electronic failure rates follow a very specific U-shaped pattern. Defects usually reveal themselves almost immediately, within the first few weeks of use. This early period is already covered by the standard manufacturer's warranty included in the price. If a device survives its first 90 days, it is overwhelmingly likely to function perfectly for years until it eventually wears out from old age. The extended warranty you buy covers the middle period, the safe zone where your device is least likely to break. You are paying a premium to ensure the safest years of the product's life. Furthermore, the protection is often an illusion. These contracts are filled with aggressive exclusions. They frequently deny claims for accidental damage, water spills, or normal wear and tear. the exact accidents you are actually worried about. Retailers push these plans so hard because they are almost pure profit. While they might make a 5% margin on the laptop itself, they can make a 50% margin on the warranty. They aren't selling you insurance because they care about your device. They are selling it because they know the odds are they will never have to fix it. Fast fashion greenwashing. The biggest lie in your closet right now is the tag on a cheap t-shirt that says sustainable. When you walk into a major fast fashion retailer today, you will almost certainly see a special section. It features garments with earth-toned labels using gentle words like conscious, aware, or future. These collections are heavily marketed campaigns designed to convince you that the brand is reforming its destructive habits. They want you to feel morally comfortable making a $5 purchase. But these green sections are a tiny drop in a massive toxic bucket. This marketing tactic is a sleight of hand designed to distract you from the sheer scale of their operations. While they highlight a single rack of clothing made with some recycled materials, the rest of the store is filled with thousands of new styles arriving every single week, mostly made from cheap plastic-based fibers derived from oil. The core business model of fast fashion is dependent on extreme speed and volume. They do not design clothes to last. They design them to fall apart or go out of style immediately. The entire system is built on the assumption that you will treat clothing as a disposable object, throwing it away quickly to make room for the next trend. The reality is that you cannot mass-produce billions of cheap garments annually and call it sustainable, regardless of what the tag says. The eco-friendly label isn't there to save the planet. It is merely a tool to soothe your guilt just enough so you keep buying into a cycle of engineered waste. Cage-free eggs. The idyllic image of a happy chicken roaming a green pasture is one of the most effective marketing fictions in the grocery store. When you reach for a carton stamped with the words cage-free, you are paying a premium for a specific assumption. You imagine hens wandering through open barn doors, pecking at the grass, and feeling the sun on their feathers. You believe that by paying that extra dollar, you are funding a humane life for the animal. But the legal definition of that term is shockingly literal. It simply means the bird is not locked inside a small metal battery cage. It does not guarantee them access to the outdoors, fresh air, or even meaningful space to move. In a typical industrial facility, tens of thousands of hens are packed into a massive windowless warehouse. They are technically out of cages, but they are jammed together on a concrete or wire floor so tightly that they often cannot spread their wings without hitting a neighbor. The air is thick with dust and ammonia. The birds live their entire lives under artificial lights, competing for food in a stressful, chaotic mob, never seeing the sky until the day they are removed. This shift wasn't a revolution in kindness, it was a shift in geometry. By removing the wire dividers, producers satisfied the changing regulations while maintaining the extreme density required for maximum profit. They engineered a way to keep the factory farming model intact while selling you the feeling of ethical consumption. The label does not describe the quality of the bird's life. It only describes the absence of a specific metal box. Superfoods, the most expensive ingredient in your morning smoothie, is not the exotic berry or the imported seed, but the adjective describing them. The term superfood appears nowhere in medical textbooks or nutritional science. It is a marketing phantom. If you search for the legal definition of the word, you will find a blank page. This lack of regulation means that any company can slap the label on any product without proving a single health claim. The concept was actually coined around World War I by a banana corporation. The United Fruit Company had a surplus of bananas and needed to convince mothers that this cheap, tropical fruit was essential for a child's survival. They published pamphlets declaring it a superfood. It wasn't a discovery, it was a sales pitch designed to move inventory. Modern marketing has refined this tactic into an art form. The strategy relies on obscurity. To justify a high price tag, the food must come from far away. A berry from the Amazon rainforest feels more valuable than an apple from an orchard 10 miles away, even if their nutritional profiles are nearly identical. This obsession creates a hierarchy that ignores basic biology. We are trained to believe that eating a bowl of kale will undo the damage of a sedentary lifestyle. We fixate on specific nutrients, like antioxidants, while ignoring the complex interactions of a complete diet. The truth is that the most powerful foods are often the most boring. Sweet potatoes, beans, and frozen spinach are nutritional powerhouses that get no glory because they are cheap and common. The industry cannot patent a carrot, so they have to invent a miracle instead. Blue light glasses. The yellow-tinted glasses sitting on your nose are solving a problem that does not actually exist. Marketing campaigns have convinced millions of office workers that the light emitting from their screens is slowly damaging their retinas. They paint blue light as a modern toxic waste that needs to be filtered out for the sake of your health. This narrative collapses the moment you walk outside. The sun is the ultimate source of blue light. A casual walk outdoors exposes your eyes to intensities hundreds of times stronger than your smartphone or laptop. If this specific wavelength were truly destroying human vision, our species would have gone blind thousands of years ago. However, the industry relies on the fact that your eyes truly do hurt after a long workday. They use this real physical pain to sell you a fake mechanical cure. The discomfort you feel is not caused by the color of the light. It is caused by the behavior of the user. When you stare at a screen, you naturally stop blinking. You hold your focus at a fixed, unnatural distance for hours at a time. Your eye muscles fatigue and the surface of your eye dries out. This is called digital eye strain. Placing a piece of plastic between you and the computer does not force you to blink more often or look away to rest your focus. Even the claim that these glasses improve sleep is largely redundant. While bright light at night can indeed disrupt your internal clock, you do not need to buy hardware to solve this. Every modern device already has a free software setting that automatically warms the screen colors after sunset. The glasses are effectively a placebo. They capitalize on our anxiety about our screen addiction. We buy them because they make us feel like we are practicing self-care, even while we continue to stare unblinking into the void. Detox teas. The entire wellness industry of detoxification is built on the false premise that your body is a stagnant swamp that accumulates sludge. In reality, you are already in possession of the most sophisticated filtration system on the planet. Your liver and kidneys are biological workhorses that run 24 hours a day. They identify impurities in your blood, break them down, and expel them naturally. If these organs actually stopped working, no amount of herbal tea would save you. You would need a hospital. The expensive detox, blends, and juice cleanses you see on social media are not aiding this process. They are bypassing it. If you look at the ingredients list on many of these boxes, you will often find a leaf called senna. This is not a magical cleansing agent. It is a potent laxative. When you drink these mixtures, the physical sensation you feel is not the release of toxins. It is the irritation of your bowel lining. You lose weight rapidly, but you are not losing fat. You are losing water and vital electrolytes. The flattened stomach you see in the mirror is simply the result of dehydration and emptiness. Notice how these companies never name the specific toxins they are removing. They use the word as a vague, scary placeholder for anything you feel insecure about. They have successfully monetized a bodily function you already possess. The best way to help your body detox is to simply drink water and let your liver do the job it has been doing since the day you were born. Alkaline water. The expensive bottle of water in your hand loses its magical properties the moment it touches your stomach acid. Manufacturers have built a multi-million-dollar empire on the claim that drinking water with a higher pH level will neutralize the acidity in your body. They promise that this alkaline state prevents cancer, increases energy, and stops aging. They are selling you a solution to a problem that your biology solved millions of years ago. To understand the lie, you only need to look at basic anatomy. Your stomach is effectively a vat of powerful acid designed to break down solid food and kill dangerous bacteria. The environment inside your stomach is roughly 100,000 times more acidic than the water you are drinking. When you pour a liter of alkaline water into this harsh chemical tank, the result is immediate neutralization. Your stomach simply produces more acid to bring the balance back to normal. The expensive pH level you paid for is destroyed within seconds of swallowing. Furthermore, the idea that you can change the acidity of your blood through your diet is medically impossible. Your body maintains your blood pH within a dangerously tight window. If your blood actually became alkaline, as these brands suggest it should, you would not feel a burst of energy. You would likely go into metabolic tremors and require immediate hospitalization. Your lungs and kidneys already work 24 hours a day to regulate your internal chemistry with absolute precision. They do not need help from a plastic bottle. The only thing alkaline water successfully drains is your bank account, leaving you with nothing but very expensive urine. VPN no-logs policies. The promise that a private company can make you invisible to the internet is a technical impossibility. When you buy a VPN subscription, the main selling point is often a strict no-logs policy. These companies assure you that they do not record your browsing history, your location, or your identity. They paint a picture of a service that acts like a magical tunnel, where your data passes through without leaving a single footprint. But the architecture of the internet makes this promise hollow. A VPN provider is not a magician. They are a network administrator. To send your data from your laptop to a website and back, their servers must know who you are and where you want to go. To prevent you from sharing your account with 50 other people, they have to track your active sessions. To fix connection issues, they often monitor traffic flow. The data has to exist for the service to function. This reality is frequently exposed in federal courtrooms. In multiple high-profile criminal cases, VPN services that advertised total anonymity handed over detailed user records to law enforcement. When faced with a subpoena and the threat of legal action, these companies almost always choose to save their business rather than your secrets. They simply turn on the recording features they claim didn't exist. Using a VPN does not erase your digital trail. It simply hides it from your internet service provider and hands it to a private corporation, often operating in a foreign country with different laws. You are not eliminating the surveillance. You are just choosing a different stranger to watch you. Expiration dates. The date stamped on your yogurt container is a guess, not a safety warning. Most of us view the numbers printed on our groceries as a strict biological deadline. We assume that at midnight on that specific day, the food transforms from nutritious to toxic. We treat the carton of milk like a ticking time bomb that must be discarded the moment the clock strikes. This belief drives one of the largest ongoing wastes of money in the modern household. The reality is that federal law does not require expiration dates on food. with the single exception of baby formula. The dates you see are not safety standards determined by health inspectors or scientists. They are arbitrary estimates decided entirely by the marketing and quality control departments of the manufacturer. These labels, often phrased as best buy or sell by, are strictly about peak quality. They indicate when the manufacturer believes the product will taste its absolute best. A cracker might be slightly less crunchy, or a sauce might be marginally less vibrant after that date, but it does not spontaneously become poisonous. Food companies have a vested interest in conservative dating. They want to ensure you only eat their product when it is perfect to protect their brand reputation. However, this system creates a profitable side effect. When you pour perfectly good milk down the sink because the date was yesterday, you immediately go to the store to buy more. You are replacing a functional product based on a phantom rule. This confusion causes consumers to throw away billions of pounds of edible food every year. We have been trained to trust a printed number more than our own senses. The best tool for determining if your food is safe is not a stamp on the packaging, but your own eyes and nose. FICO Scores. The 3-digit number determining your ability to buy a home does not measure your wealth or your financial success. Most people believe that a high credit score is a badge of honor that proves they are good with money. We view it as a report card for adulthood. If you are responsible, the number goes up. If you are reckless, the number goes down. But this belief assumes that the system was built to serve you. The reality is that the credit score is a product sold to banks, not a service provided to consumers. The Fair Isaac Corporation designed this algorithm to measure exactly one thing. It measures how profitable you are to a lender. You can verify this by looking at how the score behaves. If you were to inherit $10 million tomorrow and pay off every single debt you owe, your score would not go up. It would eventually disappear. To the algorithm, a person with zero debt and a bank account full of cash is invisible. You are useless to the system because you are not paying anyone interest. Conversely, a person who stays in debt for their entire life, making minimum payments and carrying a balance, is the ideal customer. They are reliable livestock for the banking industry. The score rewards them for remaining in the cycle of borrowing. The danger of this metric is that it has escaped the bank vault. Landlords, insurance companies, and even employers now use this number to judge your character. They are using a tool designed to measure your tolerance for debt, to measure your trustworthiness as a human being. We have been tricked into maintaining a relationship with debt, just to prove we are allowed to participate in society. TurboTax free file. The annual cost of filing your taxes is a fee you pay to a company for solving a problem they created. In many developed countries, tax season effectively does not exist. The government already possesses your financial data from your employer and bank. They simply send you a pre-filled return. If the numbers match your records, you sign it and send it back. The process takes minutes and costs nothing. This system is known as return-free filing, and it has been blocked in the United States by a massive corporate lobbying campaign. For years, the makers of TurboTax viewed a simple, free tax system as an existential threat to their profits. To protect their business model, they spent millions of dollars influencing Congress to ensure the IRS was legally forbidden from offering its own free filing software. As a compromise, the industry promised to offer a free version of their private software to millions of low-income Americans. However, investigative reporting revealed that they deliberately sabotaged this mandated service. They added code to their website that prevented the true free filing page from appearing in search engine results. Instead, they directed users to a free edition that was actually a marketing funnel. This version was designed to upsell. If a user entered information about student loans or gig economy wages, common among low-income filers, the software would trigger a paywall after the work was already done. They relied on the sunk cost of your time to force a payment. The tax prep industry effectively acts as a toll booth operator on a public highway. They did not build the road, and they do not maintain it. They simply paid the government to let them stand in the middle and charge you to pass. Ticketmaster fees. The outrageous service fee added to your concert ticket is not an administrative cost. It is a protection payment for your favorite artist's reputation. When you reach the checkout screen and see a $50 ticket suddenly balloon to $80, your immediate reaction is to despise the ticket platform. You assume the company is a greedy monopoly, exploiting its position to charge you for simple server maintenance. While the monopoly part is often true, the greed is a shared enterprise. The reality is that the platform is being paid to take the blame. Artists and venues face a difficult branding problem. They want to make as much money as possible, but they are terrified of alienating their fans. If a singer openly charges $200 for a seat, the fans accuse them of selling out. But if they charge $100 for the ticket and let the app charge another $100 in confusing fees, the fans direct all their anger at the app. This system relies on a mechanism known in the industry as a rebate. The ticketing company collects that massive service fee, but they do not keep all of it. They quietly funnel a significant portion of that money back to the venue, the promoter, and often the artists themselves. The platform effectively acts as a heat shield. They willingly accept the role of the public villain in exchange for a cut of the profits. Their true product is not the digital ticket delivered to your phone. Their product is the service of being hated so the artist can remain loved. You are not paying a convenience fee for digital processing. You are paying a fee to keep the illusion that your idol is still a man of the people. The tobacco doubt strategy. The most dangerous product the tobacco industry ever manufactured was not a cigarette, but a specific type of confusion. In the early 1950s, the executives of the largest tobacco companies faced a catastrophic problem. Medical science had finally caught up with them. Definitive studies were linking smoking to lung cancer, and the public was beginning to panic. The executives knew they could not win a fight against the hard data. The evidence was physically growing inside their customers' chests, so they decided to stop fighting the science and start fighting the feeling of certainty. They hired a powerful public relations firm to create a strategy that would delay regulation for decades. The plan was deviously simple. They did not need to prove that cigarettes were safe. They only needed to create the illusion that the medical community was still undecided. They poured millions into funding their own research institutes. These organizations were not designed to find the truth. They were designed to generate noise. Every time a legitimate study was released, the industry would counter it with skepticism, calling for more research and claiming the evidence was merely statistical, not casual. They flooded newspapers with op-eds and white papers, suggesting that everything from air pollution to stress might be the real culprit. This strategy turned a clear biological fact into a debatable political opinion. It allowed a smoker to look at a warning label and think that perhaps the jury was still out. This hesitation was exactly what the companies were buying. By keeping the public in a state of manufactured doubt, they successfully delayed government action for 40 years. They knew their product was killing people, but they also knew that confusion was the ultimate shield for profit. The sugar industry's war on fat. The low-fat label on your yogurt is the result of a bribe paid 60 years ago. In the 1960s, American men were dying of heart attacks at alarming rates. Scientists were hunting for the cause, and two main suspects emerged. One group of researchers pointed to saturated fat, while another group pointed to added sugar. The sugar industry saw an existential threat. If the public believed their product caused heart disease, sales would collapse. So, they decided to buy a different verdict. Executives from the sugar trade group approached three scientists from Harvard University. They paid them the equivalent of $50,000 in today's money to write a review of the current nutritional data. The assignment was simple. They were instructed to bury the evidence linking sugar to heart trouble and shift the blame entirely onto dietary fat. The scientists did exactly what they were paid to do. Their resulting paper was published in a prestigious medical journal and became the foundation for decades of government dietary advice. Fat became the official enemy of the state. The food industry responded immediately. They stripped the fat out of everything from salad dressing to cookies. But without fat, food loses its flavor and texture. It tastes like cardboard. To make these new, healthy products edible, manufacturers pumped them full of sugar. For the next 40 years, consumers believed they were making responsible choices by eating low-fat processed foods. In reality, they were consuming massive amounts of hidden sugar. As the country diligently cut fat from its diet, rates of obesity and diabetes skyrocketed. We were following the doctor's orders, but the doctor was reading from a script written by the Candyman. Leaded gasoline, the most successful poison in history, was not a weapon of war, but a fuel additive sold at every gas station in America. In the 1920s, the automotive industry faced a mechanical problem. Their powerful new engines made a loud, damaging noise known as knocking. General Motors researchers needed a liquid additive to smooth out the combustion. They effectively had two choices. The first was ethanol, a clean alcohol that was safe and easy to produce. The second was tetraethyl lead. The choice was decided by profit, not engineering. Ethanol was too common. Any farmer could distill it from corn, meaning the auto giants couldn't control the patent or the price. Lead, however, could be patented. It offered them a monopoly. There was just one problem. Lead is a potent neurotoxin that destroys the human brain. The executives knew this. Almost immediately after production began, workers at the factory started to hallucinate, collapse, and die. To hide the bodies, the industry launched a massive public relations campaign. They deliberately removed the word lead from all advertising, rebranding the fuel simply as ethyl. They attacked public health experts who raised alarms, labeling them as hysterical. For the next 60 years, cars sprayed a fine mist of lead into the air of every major city on Earth. It settled in the soil, the water, and the blood of generations of children. Historians and scientists now believe this exposure lowered global IQ scores and contributed significantly to the violent crime waves of the 20th century. We spent decades breathing in a known toxin, not because it was the only way to run a car, but because it was the only way to own the market. The asbestos cover-up. The insulation in your attic was known to be a killer 40 years before the public was ever warned. For most of the 20th century, asbestos was hailed as the magic mineral. It was fireproof, cheap, and nearly indestructible. Builders put it in schools, homes, and brake pads, believing it was the perfect safety material. But the executives selling this product knew the truth as early as the 1930s. Their own internal doctors were reporting that the men working in the factories were dying young. Their lungs were filled with scar tissue. Instead of stopping production, the major asbestos companies launched a secret agreement to bury the evidence. They fired doctors who tried to publish their findings. They refused to put warning labels on the bags because they worried it would hurt sales. One company even refused to install dust collectors in their plants because the managers felt it was cheaper to simply replace the workers when they got sick. The biological mechanism of the cover-up was perfect for business. Asbestos fibers are microscopic and sharp. When inhaled, they hook into the lung tissue and stay there. However, the cancer they cause takes decades to develop. This long delay allowed the industry to deny responsibility for years, claiming the sickness was unrelated to their product. By the time the government finally cracked down in the 1970s, millions of people had already been exposed. The tragedy wasn't an accident. It was a calculated decision to trade human lives for quarterly profits, relying on the clock to hide the crime. The Radium Girls. The glowing dials on military watches were painted by young women who were explicitly instructed to eat poison. In the 1920s, the United States Radium Corporation hired thousands of young women for prestigious, well-paying factory jobs. Their task was to paint the numbers on wristwatches with a special luminous fluid so soldiers could see the time in the dark. The work required extreme precision. To keep the camel hair brushes fine and pointed, the supervisors taught the girls a specific technique. It was called lip, dip, paint. The women would put the brush in their mouths to sharpen it, dip it in the radioactive paint, and apply the number. They did this hundreds of times a day. When they asked if the glowing material was harmful, their managers assured them it was completely safe. They even claimed that small amounts of radium were medicinal and would put roses in their cheeks. This was a calculated lie. While the girls on the floor were ingesting the substance, the company scientists and executives were handling the same radium with lead-lined tongs and protective masks. They knew that the element destroyed human tissue, but they viewed their workforce as disposable assets. The results were horrific. The radium settled in the women's bodies and began to rot their bones from the inside. Their teeth fell out and their jaws crumbled. When the women tried to sue, the company launched a vicious campaign to smear their reputations. They bribed doctors to diagnose the dying women with syphilis, hoping the social shame would silence them. The Radium Girls eventually won their fight in court, but it was too late to save themselves. Their suffering created the foundation for modern occupational safety laws. They forced the world to acknowledge that a company cannot hide the nature of the materials it forces its workers to touch. The lobotomy, the most barbaric medical procedure of the 20th century, was sold to the public as a gentle cure for the troubled mind. In the 1930s and 40s, mental asylums were overflowing and understaffed. Doctors had few tools to manage severely disturbed patients. Into this crisis stepped the promise of psychosurgery. Promoters of the lobotomy claimed they could surgically sever the worry circuits in the brain. They marketed it as a precise reset button that would restore sanity to the tormented. The reality of the procedure was shockingly crude. The most common method did not even require an operating room. A doctor would take a metal instrument resembling an ice pick, hammer it through the bone above the patient's eye, and wiggle it blindly back and forth into the frontal lobes. There was no precision involved. It was a random sweeping motion inside the most complex organ in the human body. The surgery did not heal the diseased parts of the brain, it simply destroyed them. The results were often devastating. While patients often became docile, it was the calmness of emptiness. They lost their personalities, their ambition, and their ability to feel complex emotions. They were not cured, they were surgically blunted. The procedure became popular not because it improved the lives of patients, but because it improved the lives of hospital staff. A difficult, noisy patient was transformed into a quiet, compliant body that was easy to manage. The lobotomy was never truly medicine. It was behavior modification through brain damage. The Stanford prison experiment. The most famous psychological experiment in history was actually a piece of directed theatre. We are taught that the Stanford prison experiment proved a dark truth about human nature. The story goes that when you give ordinary college students unlimited power, they will spontaneously turn into sadists. We believe the guards in that basement became abusive simply because they put on a uniform. But the archives reveal a different story. The guards did not act on their own. They were coached. Before the experiment began, the lead researcher met with the guards and gave them specific instructions to be tough. He told them to create a sense of fear and hopelessness. They were not discovering their inner monsters. They were following orders from their boss to make the experiment work. Even the famous mental breakdowns of the prisoners were largely performance. One of the most iconic moments involves a prisoner screaming in uncontrollable rage. Years later, that student admitted he was faking the entire episode because he wanted to leave early to study for a graduate school exam. He wasn't traumatized. He was acting to get out of a contract. The study was supposed to show how environments change behavior, but it was fatally flawed because the researcher inserted himself into the environment. He wasn't observing a prison. He was directing a movie. For decades, textbooks have used this study to claim that evil is lurking inside everyone, waiting for an excuse to come out. The reality is that the cruelty was not natural. It was requested. The Nayirah Testimony. The single most powerful story used to justify the Gulf War was a script performed by a teenager in a congressional hearing. In October 1990, the American public was hesitant about sending troops to the Middle East. The political debate was deadlocked. Then, a 15-year-old girl sat in front of a microphone at the Human Rights Caucus. She identified herself only as Nayirah. With tears streaming down her face, she told the world that she had volunteered at a hospital in Kuwait and watched Iraqi soldiers take babies out of incubators and leave them on the cold floor to die. The testimony was electric. It was aired on nightly news broadcasts across the country. It turned a complex geopolitical conflict into a simple fight between good and evil. The president repeated the story to the press, and 7 senators specifically cited this atrocity as the reason they voted to approve military action. It was the emotional tipping point that launched an invasion. But the witness was not an anonymous volunteer. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. Her appearance had been organized by a massive American public relations firm, Hill and Knowlton. The firm had conducted focus groups to find out what kind of story would make Americans angry enough to support a war. They discovered that stories about innocent children were the most effective trigger. So, they took the ambassador's daughter and coached her on her delivery, helping her perfect the pauses and the tears. Subsequent investigations by human rights organizations and journalists found no evidence that the incubator incident ever happened. The war was real and the casualties were real, but the spark that ignited the public outrage was a piece of well-rehearsed theatre. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Vietnam War was escalated into a full-scale conflict based on a sea battle that never actually happened. On a stormy night in August 1964, 2 American destroyers were patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin. Suddenly, the crews believed they were under ambush. Radar operators saw blips approaching, and sonar technicians reported the sound of torpedoes in the water. The ships spent hours swerving violently and firing hundreds of explosive shells into the darkness to defend themselves against the North Vietnamese Navy. The next morning, the sun rose over a calm sea. There was no wreckage. There were no bodies. There was no oil slick. The reason for the silence was simple. There had been no enemy ships. The attack was a mix of weather anomalies and human jitteriness. The radar blips were likely caused by high waves and atmospheric pressure. The sonar pings were just the sound of the American ship's own rudders turning in the water. Even the pilots flying air support overhead reported seeing nothing but black water. The commanders on the scene sent urgent messages to Washington, warning that the reports were likely false. They specifically asked for a pause to verify the facts. The White House ignored them. President Johnson needed a justification to intervene in Vietnam, and this phantom battle was the perfect excuse. He went on national television and declared that the United States had faced unprovoked aggression. Congress immediately passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, handing the president a blank check for war. This deception paved the way for a decade of conflict and millions of deaths. The most significant turning point of the war wasn't a military strategy. It was a ghost on a radar screen. The missile gap. One of the most terrifying political crises of the Cold War was a completely imaginary problem. In the late 1950s, the American public was gripped by a specific, paralyzing fear. After the Soviet Union successfully launched the Sputnik satellite, a narrative took hold that the Russians were mass-producing nuclear missiles. Politicians and military generals warned that the United States had fallen dangerously behind. They called it the missile gap. This phrase became a central weapon in the 1960 presidential election, used to paint the current administration as weak and asleep at the wheel. The story was simple. The Soviets were churning out intercontinental ballistic missiles like sausages, leaving America vulnerable to an overwhelming first strike. The Air Force used this fear to demand massive budget increases, and candidates used it to demand votes. But inside the White House, President Eisenhower knew it was a lie. He just couldn't prove it to the public without revealing state secrets. Eisenhower had a trump card called the U-2 spy plane. These high-altitude aircraft were flying secretly over Soviet territory, photographing their military bases. The president had seen the photos. He knew that the Soviet missile program was struggling, plagued by technical failures and delays. When the new administration finally took office and looked at the classified intelligence, the sheer scale of the deception became clear. The gap did exist, but it was in the opposite direction. While the public had been told the Soviets had hundreds of missiles pointed at New York, the actual number of functional Soviet ICBMs was 4. The United States, by comparison, had dozens, supported by a massive fleet of bombers. The world spent years holding its breath over a nuclear standoff that was, in reality, a bluff. The panic was real, but the enemy was a ghost. Uranium forgery. The evidence used to justify the invasion of Iraq was a stack of papers that looked like a clumsy high school art project. In 2002, the United States and Britain needed a smoking gun to prove Saddam Hussein was building a nuclear bomb. They found their answer in a set of intelligence documents from Italy. These papers outlined a terrifying secret deal. They claimed that Iraq had successfully purchased 500 tons of yellowcake uranium from the African nation of Niger. This specific threat became the centerpiece of the argument for war. It terrified the public and made it into the President's State of the Union address. The message was clear. The mushroom cloud was coming. But when nuclear inspectors finally got their hands on the physical documents, the lie unraveled in a single afternoon. It did not take a forensic lab to spot the fraud. A simple Google search would have been enough. The papers were filled with glaring, impossible errors. The letters were signed by a Nigerian foreign minister who had not been in office for over 10 years. The letterhead was obsolete. One of the documents featured a signature that was clearly photocopied from a completely different treaty. The dates on the stamps didn't even match the calendar. The entire package was a crude cut-and-paste job, likely created by a low-level intelligence broker trying to make a quick profit. Yet, these obvious fakes bypassed the entire intelligence apparatus of the most powerful nations on Earth because they told the story the leaders wanted to hear. The world went to war based on a receipt for a purchase that never happened. The clean Wehrmacht. The distinction between the evil Nazi fanatic and the noble German soldier is a fabrication invented after the war ended. For decades, history books taught a comfortable lie. We were told that the Holocaust and the massacres of World War II were the exclusive work of the SS and the Gestapo. The regular German army, known as the Wehrmacht, was painted as a professional fighting force that stayed out of politics and kept its hands clean. This myth was not an accident. It was a political necessity. As the Cold War began, the United States and Britain needed West Germany to rearm against the Soviet Union. You cannot build a new army if you treat every veteran as a war criminal. So, the Allies made a deal. They allowed German generals to write their own memoirs. These generals crafted a story where they were victims of Hitler, just like everyone else. They claimed they were fighting an honorable war on the front lines, while the crimes happened behind their backs without their knowledge. The evidence buried in the archives tells a much darker story. The regular army was not a bystander. They were active partners in the genocide. Wehrmacht commanders issued orders to shoot civilians and burn villages. They provided the trucks, the ammunition, and the logistical support that allowed the death squads to operate. They deliberately starved millions of Soviet prisoners of war to death. The proof was found in the pockets of the soldiers themselves. Infantrymen took thousands of photographs of mass executions and sent them home to their wives as souvenirs. The clean Wehrmacht was never a reality. It was a diplomatic alibi designed to let the world move on without looking too closely at the past. Operation Paperclip. The most horrific war criminals of the 20th century did not go to prison. They went to the payroll. We are taught that the end of World War II brought a wave of justice. We see the black and white footage of the Nuremberg trials and assume that the monsters were punished. But behind closed doors, the American government made a cold calculation. They decided that winning the next war was more important than punishing the last one. In Germany, this took the form of Operation Paperclip. American intelligence identified top Nazi scientists who had developed advanced rocket technology. Many of these men were dedicated party members who had used slave labor from concentration camps to build their machines. Instead of facing a judge, they were secretly brought to the United States. Their files were scrubbed of incriminating evidence, and they were given jobs at NASA. The men who built the V-2 rocket to destroy London were rebranded as the heroes who took America to the moon. The trade was even darker in the Pacific. In Japan, a covert group known as Unit 731 had spent years conducting biological experiments on living human prisoners. They tested bubonic plague, performed surgery without anesthesia, and froze limbs to study gangrene. When the war ended, the American authorities did not prosecute the unit's leader, General Shiro Ishii. Instead, they offered him a secret deal. If he handed over his medical data, he would be granted total immunity. The United States wanted the results of his torture to gain an edge in biological warfare. The lie, we are told, is that justice is blind. The reality is that justice was negotiable. The foundation of modern space travel and biological defense was purchased with a get-out-of-jail-free card for mass murderers. The Spanish flu. The deadliest pandemic in modern history is named after the only country that was honest enough to admit it existed. In 1918, the world was locked in the trenches of the First World War. As millions of soldiers moved across borders, they brought a terrifying new virus with them. It began striking down troops in the United States, France, and Germany with lethal speed. The virus was tearing through the barracks, but the public heard almost nothing about it. The silence was a calculated military tactic. The governments of the warring nations were terrified that news of a plague would destroy troop morale and signal weakness to the enemy. To keep the war machine running, they enforced strict censorship laws. Newspapers in London, Washington, and Berlin were forbidden from printing anything that might damage the war effort. They buried the story to protect the front lines. Spain, however, was neutral. They were not fighting in the Great War, which meant they had no need for military censorship. When the virus crossed their borders and infected their citizens, including the king himself, the Spanish press did their job. They published headlines detailing the spread of this mysterious, deadly fever. Because Spain was the only voice speaking into the global silence, the rest of the world assumed the disease originated there. People reading the papers in censored countries saw only reports from Madrid and naturally labelled it the Spanish flu. The name was a branding accident caused by transparency. Modern evidence suggests the virus likely began in a farming community in Kansas or a troop staging area in France. Spain did not start the plague, nor did they suffer the worst of it. They were simply the only nation brave enough to tell the truth, while everyone else was lying to win a war. Pat Tillman, the most famous war hero of the post-9/11 era, was used as a prop in a story that never happened. When Pat Tillman walked away from a multi-million-dollar NFL contract to enlist in the Army Rangers, he instantly became a symbol of American sacrifice. He was the perfect recruit for a military seeking public support. So, when he was killed in action in Afghanistan in 2004, the government immediately told the world a cinematic tale of heroism. The official report claimed Tillman died charging up a hill, yelling commands to his fellow soldiers while under devastating fire from an enemy ambush. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star, and his story was broadcast across every news network as a rallying cry for the war effort. But the men who were actually in the canyon that day knew the truth within moments. There were no enemy combatants on the ridge. Tillman had been killed by his own side. In the chaos of a poorly organised patrol, a trailing platoon had opened fire on Tillman's position, mistaking him for the enemy. Instead of reporting this tragic accident, the chain of command initiated a deliberate cover-up. Within hours of his death, officers on the ground were ordered to burn Tillman's uniform and body armour, effectively destroying the forensic evidence. They seized his personal diary. Most cruelly, they allowed his family to bury him believing the false narrative, waiting weeks to reveal the reality. The motivation for this deception was timing. The military was facing a PR disaster with the emerging Abu Ghraib prison scandal. They needed a pure, unblemished hero to distract the public and boost morale. They turned a tragic case of fratricide into a recruiting poster, proving that the first casualty of war is often the truth. United Fruit Company. The innocent yellow fruit sitting on your kitchen counter was the fuel for a corporate empire that swallowed entire nations. For most of the 20th century, the United Fruit Company was not just a business, it was an occupying force. They marketed themselves to the American public as a benevolent developer, claiming they brought railroads, telegraphs, and civilization to the jungles of Central America. They sold the image of the Great White Fleet, inviting tourists to sail south and enjoy the tropical paradise they had supposedly built. The reality on the ground was a system of total control. They didn't build railroads to connect cities for the benefit of the locals. They built them solely to move bananas from the plantation to the port. If you wanted to travel or send a letter, you paid their toll. They owned the mail, the telegraph lines, and the land. The deception reached its peak in Guatemala in 1954, when a democratically elected president tried to buy back unused land to give to impoverished farmers. The company did not negotiate. They called the White House. Using their deep political connections, they convinced the American government that this land reform was actually a Soviet beachhead. The result was a CIA-sponsored coup that destroyed a democracy to save a profit margin. They replaced a president with a dictator who would protect their monopoly. The term Banana Republic is not just a clothing brand. It was a derogatory name for a country that had ceased to be a sovereign nation and had become a private plantation. We got cheap fruit, but the people who grew it lost their freedom. The Columbus hero myth. The statue of Christopher Columbus, standing in the town square, is not a monument to history, but to a marketing campaign created 400 years after he died. We are taught in grade school that Columbus was a visionary genius who proved the earth was round, while everyone else feared falling off the edge. This is complete fiction. Every educated person in 1492 already knew the planet was a sphere. Columbus was not a genius. He was simply terrible at math. He calculated the size of the ocean to be far smaller than it actually was. He didn't find the Americas because of his brilliance. He stumbled into them because he was lucky enough to hit land before his crew starved to death. To his dying day, he refused to admit he had found a new continent, insisting he had merely found a shortcut to Asia. The image of the noble explorer crumbles the moment you read his own journals. Upon arrival, his first thoughts were not of trade, but of enslavement. He viewed the indigenous Taino people as raw capital. His time as governor of Hispaniola was so horrific that it shocked even his contemporaries. He ruled with such cruelty, mutilating natives who failed to collect enough gold and executing Spanish colonists without trial, that the Spanish king and queen actually had him arrested. He returned to Europe not in triumph, but in chains, stripped of his titles for being a tyrant. So why do we celebrate him? The national holiday was not established to honor the man's character. It was pushed in the 20th century to appease Italian-American voters who were facing intense discrimination. They needed a hero to prove they belonged in the American story. We don't celebrate the actual captain. We celebrate a mascot invented to serve a political purpose. Lemmings Suicide. The most famous example of mass suicide in the animal kingdom is actually a crime scene created by a film crew. For decades, we have used the word lemming to describe someone who mindlessly follows the crowd into disaster. We picture thousands of fuzzy rodents marching in unison toward a cliff and plunging into the sea. This specific image is burned into our collective memory by a 1958 Disney nature documentary called White Wilderness. The film won an Academy Award for its stunning portrayal of this tragic natural instinct. But the entire sequence was a fabrication. The filming took place in Alberta, Canada, which is a landlocked province with no outlet to the sea. Since lemmings are not native to that area, the filmmakers purchased a few dozen of them from Inuit children in a different province. They transported the animals to the set and placed them on a large turntable covered in snow to film tight shots of them running, creating the illusion of a massive, endless migration. When it came time for the dramatic climax, the animals refused to jump. Survival instinct is powerful, and lemmings are not suicidal. To get the shot, the crew had to physically herd the confused animals to the edge of a riverbank. Off camera, they pushed and threw the lemmings into the water. The footage of them drowning was narrated as a mysterious act of nature, but it was simply animal cruelty edited for dramatic effect. In reality, lemmings do migrate when their population explodes and food becomes scarce. They are capable swimmers who cross small bodies of water to find new territory. Occasionally, some drown if the current is too strong, but these are accidents, not a death pact. The only mindless behavior in that documentary belonged to the humans behind the camera. The alpha wolf. The entire concept of the alpha male is based on a scientific mistake that the author spent 40 years trying to retract. In the 1940s, researchers observed a group of wolves living in a zoo. They watched the animals engaging in vicious, violent battles for dominance. They saw a clear hierarchy emerge, where the strongest male ruled through aggression, forcing the others into submission. From these observations, the term alpha entered our vocabulary as the ultimate symbol of leadership and power. But the study had a fatal design flaw. The wolves being observed were not a natural pack. They were unrelated strangers, captured from different places, and forced to live together in a small enclosure. The behavior, the scientists saw, was not the natural order of the wild. It was the stress response of inmates in a prison yard. They were fighting because they were terrified and trapped with strangers. When scientists finally developed the technology to track wolves in the wild, the picture changed completely. They discovered that a natural wolf pack is simply a family. The leader is not a tyrant who won a fight. The leader is just the father. The subordinates are simply his children. In the wild, the father does not walk in front to assert dominance. He often walks in the back or the middle to keep an eye on the group. He does not eat first while the others starve. He ensures the pups are fed. The structure is based on care and protection, not conquest. The researcher who popularized the original theory, L. David Mech, eventually realized his error. He pleaded with publishers to stop printing his old books. Yet the myth persists in human culture. We use it to justify bullying in boardrooms and gyms, modeling our definition of success on the behavior of confused, captive animals rather than the reality of nature. Google Incognito Mode, the dark window you toggle on to browse in secret, is not a cloak of invisibility. When you click that button and see the icon of a spy in a hat and glasses, your brain makes a logical assumption. You believe you have entered a private tunnel where your actions are hidden from the outside world. You feel safe exploring the internet without a digital trail. But this feature was never built to hide you from the internet. It was built to hide your activity from the other people living in your house. The software simply deletes the record from your own machine. It ensures that your spouse or your roommate cannot open your history tab and see where you have been. It is a domestic privacy tool, not a digital shield. Once your request leaves your computer, you are walking in broad daylight. Your internet service provider logs every website you visit to manage your bill. The network administrator at your job can see you are not working. Most importantly, the sites you visit are still tracking you. They use a technique called fingerprinting. By analyzing your screen size, your battery level, and your software version, they can identify your specific device with frightening accuracy, even without using cookies. Internal documents released during a recent lawsuit revealed that Google continued to collect data on users who were browsing in this private mode. They used this information to feed their advertising algorithms, proving that the privacy was merely cosmetic. Using this mode is like closing the curtains in your living room while leaving the front door wide open. You cannot see out, but everyone else can still walk right in. You are not a ghost. You are simply a user who decided not to write in their diary. Alien invasion panic. The story of millions of Americans fleeing their homes in terror from an imaginary alien invasion is a myth created by newspapers to crush a rival. We have all heard the legend of the War of the Worlds broadcast. We are told that on Halloween night in 1938, Orson Welles narrated a radio play so convincing that it broke the mind of the nation. We picture families huddled around the wireless, loading shotguns and packing cars to escape the Martians. We believe it was a moment where technology tricked the entire country. But the reality is that almost no one was actually listening. That night, the vast majority of American radios were tuned to a comedy show on a rival network featuring a popular ventriloquist. The ratings data from the time shows that the alien drama had a tiny audience. It was a niche artistic performance, not a national news event. The myth of the panic was not born on the radio waves. It was born the next morning in the print headlines. At the time, the newspaper industry was terrified of radio. They were losing advertising money to this new, instant medium. They needed a way to prove that radio was dangerous, irresponsible, and untrustworthy. Editors seized on a few isolated reports of confused callers and blew them up into a nationwide catastrophe. They published sensational stories claiming that radio had caused mass hysteria to convince advertisers that print was the only safe place for their money. The irony is deep. The public did not fall for the fake news about the Martians. They fell for the fake news about the panic. Drapetomania. The most racist medical diagnosis in American history claimed that the desire for freedom was actually a mental illness. In the mid-19th century, Southern plantation owners faced a persistent issue. Their enslaved workers kept trying to escape. Rather than acknowledging that human beings naturally hate captivity, a Louisiana physician named Samuel Cartwright offered them a comforting scientific alternative. He proposed that these runaways were not reacting to oppression, but were suffering from a disease of the mind. He gave this condition a fancy name, drapetomania. He constructed the term from Greek roots to make it sound like a legitimate medical discovery. His central theory was that black people were biologically engineered for submission and service. Therefore, any urge to run away, hide, or seek liberty was not a rational choice, but a clear sign of brain malfunction. He argued that a healthy slave was a happy slave, and an unhappy one was simply sick. This pseudoscience served a dark, practical purpose. It absolved the slaveholders of guilt. It turned the act of capture and punishment into a form of medical care. When a master hunted down a fugitive, he could tell himself he was not acting as a tyrant, but as a doctor administering a necessary treatment to a confused patient. The prescribed cures revealed the true cruelty of the diagnosis. Cartwright suggested that the best way to treat this madness was strict discipline, physical labor, and whipping. He effectively dressed up torture in a white lab coat. The diagnosis stands today as a stark reminder of how authority figures can twist the language of science to justify the unjustifiable. The Domino Theory. The metaphor that drove America into a 20-year war was based on the physics of toy blocks, not the reality of politics. In the 1950s, Western leaders were looking for a simple way to explain the complex spread of communism in Asia. They settled on an image that everyone understood: a row of dominoes standing on end. President Eisenhower famously argued that if you knocked over the first one, Vietnam, the rest of the region would fall over quickly and inevitably. This theory transformed independent nations into mindless objects. It assumed that countries like Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand had no internal history, no unique culture, and no will of their own. It suggested that their political destiny was entirely determined by what happened to their neighbor. It painted a picture of a mechanical chain reaction that could only be stopped by American military force. The reality on the ground was far more complicated. The conflicts in Southeast Asia were not a unified march of global communism. They were largely fueled by local nationalism. The Vietnamese were fighting primarily for independence from colonial powers, not to serve the Soviet Union or China. In fact, these communist nations were often rivals who distrusted each other deeply. When Vietnam eventually did fall to the north in 1975, the predicted chain reaction never happened. The rest of Southeast Asia did not collapse. Thailand and Malaysia remained independent. The blocs refused to fall because they weren't blocs at all. They were distinct societies with their own strengths and motivations. The Domino Theory was a seductive simplification. It allowed politicians to sell a war by appealing to fear rather than geography. It turned a complex map of human struggle into a child's game, blinding a superpower to the actual nature of the enemy it was fighting. The Thanksgiving peace myth. The dinner party you learned about in grade school is a fable invented to hide a desperate political gamble. We are taught that the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe sat down together because they shared a bond of friendship and gratitude. We picture a scene of mutual respect where neighbours broke bread in a pristine wilderness. The historical reality was far more cynical. By the time the English arrived, the Wampanoag population had been shattered by a plague brought by previous European traders. Their leader, Massasoit, was not looking for dinner guests. He was looking for bodyguards. He was surrounded by rival tribes who wanted to conquer his weakened people. He reached out to the Pilgrims not out of kindness, but because they had muskets. It was a strategic military alliance born of necessity, not affection. The meal itself wasn't a scheduled celebration of unity. It was likely a harvest festival where the English were firing guns into the air, and the Wampanoag warriors rushed in thinking their allies were under attack. Once they realized it was a party, they stayed to keep an eye on the unpredictable settlers. It was a tense diplomatic summit, not a family reunion. Furthermore, this alliance did not lead to a happily ever after. Within a generation, the children of those same Pilgrims were at war with the children of those same Wampanoag. It ended in King Philip's War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history, where the settlers hunted down, killed and enslaved the very people who had supposedly saved their parents. The holiday we celebrate today wasn't made official until the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln needed a comforting story to unite a broken nation. We celebrate the myth of the peace because the reality of the betrayal is too hard to swallow. Subliminal advertising. The belief that a flashing image can mind control you into buying a soda is based on a marketing stunt that never actually happened. The panic began in 1957 inside a movie theater in Fort Lee, New Jersey. A market researcher named James Vickery announced that he had conducted a groundbreaking psychological experiment. He claimed that during the screening of a film, he had spliced in single frames of text that flashed on the screen for a fraction of a second. Too fast for the conscious eye to see, but slow enough for the subconscious mind to grab. The messages were simple commands: hungry, eat popcorn, and drink Coca-Cola. Vickery told the press that the results were terrifyingly effective. He reported that popcorn sales spiked by nearly 60% and soda sales by 18%. The public reaction was immediate hysteria. People were convinced that governments and corporations had unlocked the key to brainwashing. The CIA began investigating the technology, and the practice was banned in several countries. But the entire event was a fabrication. James Vickery was not a scientist. He was a struggling ad man with a failing business. Years later, he admitted in an interview that the experiment never took place. He had invented the data out of thin air to generate publicity for his firm. When scientists finally tried to replicate his claims under controlled conditions, the effect vanished. They found that while the human brain might register a fleeting image, it does not translate that flash into a compulsion to act. The myth of subliminal advertising endures because we are afraid of being puppets. It is comforting to think we only buy junk food because of a secret magic trick. The reality is much more boring. Advertisers do not need to hide their messages to manipulate you. They are perfectly capable of convincing you to buy things right out in the open. Collagen supplements. The expensive powder you stir into your morning coffee to erase wrinkles is based on a biological misunderstanding. The wellness industry wants you to believe that your body works like a direct delivery service. They market the idea that if you swallow a scoop of collagen, it travels straight to your face to plump up your skin and smooth out fine lines. They sell it as a replacement part for your aging body, suggesting that you can simply eat the thing you want to become. However, your digestive system is not a delivery service. It is a demolition crew. When you ingest that protein shake, your stomach acid does not respect the brand name on the tub or the promise on the label. It immediately attacks the complex collagen molecule, stripping it down into its tiniest building blocks, known as amino acids. By the time the supplement leaves your stomach, it is no longer collagen. It is just a generic soup of nutrients. Once these building blocks enter your bloodstream, your body decides where they are needed most. It prioritizes survival over vanity. It might use those nutrients to repair a torn muscle, heal a gut lining, or strengthen a blood vessel. You cannot tell your body to send that specific spoonful of powder to the crow's feet around your eyes. The logic behind these supplements is scientifically flawed. It is akin to believing that eating a brain will make you smarter, or eating an eyeball will improve your vision. Biology does not work by direct transfer. The industry is selling you a very expensive form of standard protein. You could get the exact same raw materials from a piece of chicken or a hard-boiled egg for a fraction of the cost. Lady Godiva, the most famous horse ride in history, never actually happened. The story of Lady Godiva riding naked through the streets of Coventry to protest her husband's taxes is a fairy tale invented long after she was dead. The real woman was named Godgifu, and she was far from a desperate housewife. She was one of the wealthiest landowners in 11th century England. She and her husband, the Earl, were not bitter enemies fighting over money. They were a powerful political team who founded monasteries and governed the region together. If Godiva had actually ridden naked through a medieval town, the scribes of her time would have definitely written it down. Yet, there is not a single mention of the event while she was alive. The story first appeared in a book written by monks 200 years later. It was likely a myth created to make her seem more saintly or to attract religious pilgrims to the church she funded. Even the villain of the story is a fake. The character of Peeping Tom, the man who went blind for looking at her, was not in the original legend. He was added nearly 600 years later to make the story more exciting for new audiences. We love the image of a noblewoman sacrificing her dignity to help the poor. It is a perfect story of rebellion against authority. But the reality is much more boring. Lady Godiva was a serious, pious aristocrat who kept her clothes on, paid her taxes, and died in her bed. Abner Doubleday invented baseball. We are taught that a young man named Abner Doubleday invented baseball in a cow pasture in Cooperstown, New York in 1839. This specific date and location are the entire reason the Baseball Hall of Fame stands where it does today. The story claims he scratched the diamond into the dirt and wrote the rules from scratch, giving the nation a homegrown sport. But there is a glaring historical problem with this timeline. In 1839, Abner Doubleday was not playing in a field in rural New York. He was a cadet at West Point Academy, tied down by strict military discipline hundreds of miles away. Doubleday eventually became a famous Civil War general and wrote voluminous diaries throughout his life. In thousands of pages of personal writing, he never once mentioned the game of baseball. He died without ever knowing he was supposed to be its father. The myth was manufactured in 1905 by a group of men, led by sporting goods tycoon Albert Spaulding. Spaulding was desperate to prove that baseball was a purely American invention. He hated the factual reality that the sport had evolved slowly from a British children's game called Rounders. He needed a patriotic origin story to sell the game's independence. The commission relied on a single dubious letter from an elderly man recalling a memory from 60 years prior. They ignored the lack of evidence and anointed the war hero Doubleday as the creator because it made for a better legend. Baseball was never invented by a single person in a single afternoon. It grew organically in city streets and parks, but the truth was too boring for a national monument. The Bermuda Triangle. We tend to think of the Bermuda Triangle as an ancient maritime mystery. In reality, the concept was manufactured in the 1960s to sell paperbacks. Writers noticed that ships and planes occasionally vanished in the region between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. They drew a line connecting these dots and claimed a supernatural force was at work. They conveniently ignored the fact that this specific triangle is one of the busiest intersections of sea and air traffic in the world. The deception lies in the context. If you track 10,000 ships going through a busy shipping lane, you will naturally see more accidents than if you track 10 ships going through a quiet one. When the Coast Guard analyzes the percentage of vessels lost in this area, the rate is exactly the same as anywhere else on the globe. There is no statistical anomaly. Ships do not disappear here more frequently than they do in the North Sea or the Pacific. There are simply more ships to begin with. The ultimate proof that the triangle is a myth comes from the insurance industry. Companies like Lloyd's of London are in the business of calculating risk with absolute precision. If ships were truly being swallowed by aliens or magnetic vortexes, insuring a boat in that region would cost a fortune. It does not. They charge the exact same premiums for a voyage through the triangle as they do for any other stretch of ocean. The real culprit is usually the weather. This area is known for sudden, violent storms and the fast-moving Gulf Stream, which can erase wreckage quickly. The mystery isn't what happened to the ships. The mystery is why we chose to believe in magic rather than the simple reality of a storm. Yelp Extortion. The star rating deciding where you eat dinner is often a reflection of a budget, not a menu. Small business owners across the country have a very specific name for the review platform Yelp. They call it a mafia protection racket for the digital age. The company pitches itself as a democratic town square where the best businesses naturally rise to the top. But behind the scenes, the visibility of those reviews is controlled by a mysterious gatekeeper known as the recommendation algorithm. This software decides which reviews are legitimate and which ones should be hidden in a grayed-out link at the bottom of the page. While Yelp claims this filter protects against spam, thousands of business owners report a disturbing pattern. They receive aggressive calls from sales representatives asking them to buy monthly advertising packages. When the owner refuses to pay, they watch their glowing 5-star reviews suddenly vanish into the not recommended filter, while negative 1-star reviews mysteriously rise to the top of the profile. When the business owner panics and calls back, the sales rep suggests that advertising might help them manage their page more effectively. It creates an environment where visibility feels like a hostage that must be ransomed. The company aggressively denies that money influences the algorithm. However, when these accusations reached the federal courts, the judges handed down a surprising ruling. They didn't say the manipulation wasn't happening. They said it wasn't illegal. The court ruled that Yelp is a private publisher, not a public utility. They have the legal right to arrange reviews in whatever order maximizes their profit. The stars you see aren't always a measure of quality. They are often a measure of who paid the toll. Dark patterns. We tend to think of website design as neutral. We assume that a button is just a tool to get us where we want to go. But in modern software, the interface is often an opponent. Designers use a strategy called dark patterns to rig the game against you. These are specific visual tricks that exploit the way your brain scans a page to force you into decisions you didn't mean to make. Consider the Roach Motel. This is a common design where getting into a situation is easy, but getting out is nearly impossible. You can sign up for a free trial with a single click of a giant green button. But when you try to cancel, the link is hidden in a grey font on a grey background, buried 3 pages deep in a settings menu. They have built a digital maze where the exit is deliberately concealed. Another common trick is confirm shaming. When you try to decline a newsletter or a discount, the site doesn't just offer a no button. It forces you to click a button that says something humiliating like, "No thanks, I hate saving money." This manipulation weaponizes your own sense of pride to bully you into compliance. These designs are not bad by accident. They are data-driven. Companies run thousands of tests to find the exact shade of color and placement of text that confuses the most users into paying. You aren't battling a clumsy website. You are battling an algorithm designed to monetize your frustration. The free internet. The $0 price tag on your favorite app is not a gift. It is a lure. We have been trained to believe that the internet is a public library where information is free for the taking. We assume that search engines and social networks exist to serve us. But if you look at the flow of money, the reality is flipped. You are not the customer of these platforms because you do not pay them. You are the product they are selling. The business model of the modern web is built entirely on surveillance. Every time you search for a symptom, pause on a video, or like a photo, you are performing unpaid labor. You are generating data points that build a highly specific digital profile of your life. These companies know your location, your political leanings, your spending habits, and even your emotional state based on how fast you type. They take this raw material and process it into a prediction product. The real customers are the advertisers who pay billions for the certainty that they can interrupt your day at the exact moment you are most vulnerable to persuasion. They are not just buying ad space, they are buying access to your behavior. This exchange creates a conflict of interest. The platform is not designed to be helpful or truthful. It is designed to be addictive. The longer you stay glued to the screen, the more data you generate and the more ads you see. The algorithm deliberately feeds you content that makes you angry or anxious because strong emotions keep you clicking. We think we are browsing the world for free, but we are paying for it with our privacy and our peace of mind.